Power tests a ruler's courage. That's a truth that's, etched into the foundations of history. We've seen so many examples of leaders rising or falling based on their ability to command, to negotiate, and to defend.
But there's a test that is far more constant and frankly, far more critical to the health of any constitutional state.
And what would that be?
It's the test of character, specifically how that character interacts with the greatest source of temptation in governance, public wealth.
Ah, the money.
Exactly. If a leader lacks the moral restraint to protect the people's resources, their authority in every other area, law, defense, welfare, it's fundamentally compromised.
Absolutely. And for several deep dives now, we've been immersed in the source material covering the constitutional decisions of Abu Bakr As-Siddiq. We've looked at judiciary independence, the principles of welfare governance.
But the big question has always been lingering in the background.
How do you pay for it all? How do you keep the Treasury solvent and, maybe more importantly, uncorrupted?
Right. We're transitioning now from, let's say, the Declaration of Rights to the ethical funding of those rights.
Yeah.
This is where we examine the actual structure he put in place for public finance, how money was collected, how it was rigorously protected, and then how it was equitably distributed.
So today's mission is all about this economic backbone. We're analyzing 8 crucial constitutional decisions, cases 81 through 88 in our source material. And these decisions, they essentially outline what the sources call the world's first comprehensive ethical financial model.
And it was built on a really rigorous philosophy of, well, absolute honesty and just zero tolerance for corruption.
This wasn't just a suggestion for good behavior, was it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
This established hard constitutional law about the Treasury that mandated strict financial discipline and complete verifiable transparency. And that applied to every single level of the state.
So we're using excerpts from the constitutional decisions of Abu Bakr As-Siddiq, and we're moving from the big ideas of justice to the operational mechanics that turned a welfare state from a concept into a funded reality.
Okay, so if you're going to build a system with zero corruption, you have to start at the very top. You have to define the relationship between the leader and the money they manage.
That's right.
Case 81 is where this entire ethical structure begins. It sets a really radical precedent for the nature of the public treasury. What was the core declaration here?
The foundational principle in Case 81 was this complete separation of the state's resources from the ruler's personal domain. The wealth of the state was declared to be neither his personal property, his malik, nor the sovereign possession of the government.
So what was it then?
It was deemed a sacred trust, something that belonged entirely to the community, to the people.
That is a profound constitutional shift. I mean, if you look at the empires of the time, the Byzantines, the Sassanids, the Treasury was basically an extension of the royal household.
Yeah.
The emperor owned the wealth.
He owned it, and he dispensed it at his personal discretion. That's the crucial contrast. Abu Bakr eliminated that proprietary model entirely. And the specific phrasing he used is essential.
Yeah, he said.
He said, "This wealth is the property of Allah and the Muslims. I am only its guardian."
Let's break that down for a moment, because the choice of words there carries immense constitutional weight. He calls himself a guardian, a wali, not an owner. What are the legal implications of that?
Well, it creates an immediate and non-negotiable fiduciary duty. Legally speaking, a guardian manages assets for beneficiaries. In this case, the beneficiaries are the entire citizenry. The wali cannot profit from the assets.
So he can only preserve them?
Preserve them, manage them prudently, and use them exclusively for the benefit of the actual owners.
Which are the people. So if the Caliph is just the custodian, the constitutional implication is that every single expenditure has to be justified as serving the public interest. There's no room for, personal spending. None at all. It mandates immediate and perpetual accountability. If you're just the custodian, you're always open to scrutiny by the true owners, the people, if you mismanage their property.
It becomes a legal check on power.
Exactly. It separates the state budget from the private purse of the leader, and that separation is the first vital step away from monarchy and toward constitutional governance.
Okay, so that sets the philosophical expectation. But we all know philosophy can buckle under pressure. How did he make sure his personal behavior matched this standard? And that brings us to Case 88, which defines the ultimate standard for personal financial discipline.
Case 88 is the practical expression of Case 81, and the standard he set was absolute. He declared that he should be held accountable and judged if he misused even a thread or a needle of public wealth.
A thread or a needle, that's such a tiny thing, it's almost hyperbolic. Most leaders today worry about macro-level audits, not office supplies. Why was that level of detail so important?
Because corruption rarely begins with a million-dollar contract. It begins with the small, habitual sense of entitlement. By setting the standard at a thread or a needle, he was basically externalizing his internal moral compass.
You are sending a message.
A very clear message to every single employee. The concept of minor theft from the public purse does not exist. Every public asset, no matter how small, is equally sacred.
And the sources give us a really powerful illustration of him applying this to himself, don't they? Tell us about the example of him repaying the state for basic goods.
Right, the famous anecdote. It involves his use of basic consumables, like oil for a public lamp or some food from the state store, while he was working on personal, non-state business.
So what did he do?
He made sure that for any personal use of a public commodity, he settled the account. He paid it back.
But wait, if he was the Caliph, wouldn't it have been simpler and, more practical to just use a state expense account? Was this self-imposed reimbursement just symbolic?
I'd argue it was far more than symbolic. It was a constitutional standard. A state expense account introduces that gray area of entitlement. What counts as state business versus personal maintenance.
I see.
By personally tracking and repaying for every single consumable, he eliminated that gray area completely. He demonstrated that the highest office doesn't come with an automatic perk package. His job was to serve, not to consume.
That makes leadership by example the most powerful enforcement mechanism you can have. If the head of state treats the state's olive oil with that much reverence, what possible excuse could a governor have for misappropriating thousands of dinars?
None. The ethical standard just cascades down the hierarchy. This establishes that the personal ethics of the leader are inseparable from the financial discipline of the state.
It's what modern anti-corruption laws try to get at.
Exactly. Conflicts of interest, disclosure rules, transparency around benefits. Case 88 shows this absolute standard was required from day one.
That level of personal asceticism is genuinely hard to wrap your head around in a modern context. And that rigorous self-audit brings us directly to Case 82, the zero corruption policy and self-accountability.
Case 82 basically formalizes this into state policy, a strict ban on using any public assets for personal comfort or gain, no matter what the justification might be.
In a state that was expanding so rapidly with limited resources, it must have been incredibly tempting for the Caliph to, rationalize a comfortable stipend.
Oh, for sure. But rationalization is where public trust begins to erode. And initially, a comfortable stipend was proposed for him. People recognized the sheer amount of time he was dedicating to public service.
And he refused.
He absolutely refused any stipend that afforded comfort or luxury. He insisted on receiving only the bare minimum needed for a modest survival, just enough so he could dedicate his full time to the caliphate without his family starving.
He saw the office as a burden of duty, not a vehicle for comfort.
Precisely.
But let me challenge that a bit. While it's an inspiring personal example, wouldn't such radical asceticism make it hard to attract talented administrators, people who might need a decent living wage to manage a growing state?
That's an excellent and very practical question. The sources suggest a balance was struck. The Caliph's personal asceticism didn't mean all administrators lived in poverty.
So it was just for him.
It set the moral ceiling. It showed that public service was fundamentally about duty, not personal profit. Compensation was based on need and service, but the message from the very top was clear. Accumulating wealth through office was forbidden. This tended to attract administrators who valued piety and good governance over personal gain.
So the moral cost of perceived entitlement far outweighed the budgetary benefit of a stipend.
Exactly. And nothing underscores this more than the final act detailed in Case 82. Before his death, Abu Bakr meticulously accounted for and returned all state belongings.
All of them.
Every coin, every piece of equipment, every bit of property that had been assigned to the office of the Caliph.
That's the ultimate debt settlement. It sends a message that the benefits of the office were only ever temporary, and the ledger has to be balanced before you leave.
It solidifies the principle that the ruler is only renting the benefits of the office. In modern governance, we mandate asset declarations when officials enter and leave office. Case 82 shows that while external checks are vital, the real constitutional strength is when the ruler enforces that standard on themselves first.
He self-audited his entire estate
to ensure zero public leakage. The conclusion from these three cases is clear. The moment a leader believes they're entitled to use the people's wealth for private advantage, they've failed the constitutional ethics of the state, regardless of what any external auditor might say.
So we've established the ethical character of the ruler. But good governance needs systems that can scale beyond the morality of one person. Character is essential, but systems make ethics repeatable.
That's right. You need infrastructure.
And Case 84 addresses that very need, establishing a transparent accounting system.
Integrity requires records. It's a fundamental principle. Even in the earliest days of this state, they recognized you can't possibly maintain financial discipline or public trust without verifiable, permanent evidence of every transaction.
This must have been a revolutionary administrative task for a rapidly growing state in the early 7th century. What did this system actually look like?
Abu Bakr mandated the formal creation and maintenance of written ledgers. This was a centralized effort to track all treasury movements, and it required dedicated scribes, or katib, to manage the data.
So this wasn't just informal note-taking.
No, this was the foundation of an official, audited archive.
And what specific information was required in these ledgers?
The sources specify meticulous tracking of both inflow and outflow. On the inflow side, they tracked the collection of Zakat, the mandatory poor dues, and other taxes and income. On the outflow side, they had detailed distribution records.
So they knew where the money was going.
Exactly, specifying where and to whom funds were dispensed, ensuring a clear chain of accountability from collection to distribution.
So every financial action had a clear corresponding entry. This is essentially setting the foundation for what would later become, sophisticated double-entry bookkeeping in the Islamic Golden Age.
Absolutely. The significance here is that they treated record-keeping not as a bureaucratic hassle, but as a constitutional mandate. It was a necessary defense mechanism for the public trust.
Because anyone could check the books, theoretically.
It meant that every coin collected and every distribution made could be traced, verified, and reconciled. This public auditability prevents localized corruption by making it impossible to hide discrepancies.
If people know where the money is coming from and where it's going, it builds profound confidence in the government's integrity. The lesson is that structural transparency is the most robust defense against financial opacity.
And this speaks directly to modern concerns. We rely on complex accounting standards, financial software, annual audits. Why? Because the absence of verifiable records instantly invalidates any claim of honesty. Case 84 shows that transparency has to be baked into the constitutional structure from the very beginning.
Okay, now let's move beyond the capital. If the center keeps excellent records, but the vast network of regional officials, governors, tax collectors unsupervised, the system is still vulnerable.
Very vulnerable.
Case 85 deals with this. Strict financial oversight over governors and officials.
This was the direct response to the challenge of decentralized power. It was understood that distance and local authority create vulnerabilities. So financial discipline had to be applied strictly and consistently across every tier of the administration.
And what were the specific rules aimed at closing the door on temptation for these governors?
The rules focused on eliminating conflicts of interest and unauthorized spending. Two were paramount. First, governors were strictly forbidden from accepting any gifts. Second, they were barred from using state funds for any purpose without explicit authorization from the central authority.
Let's focus on that gift ban for a second. In many traditional societies, gift-giving is a sign of respect, even diplomacy. But in government, a gift can quickly become a subtle bribe.
It's the primary way for wealthy local interests to buy influence. By constitutionally outlawing the acceptance of gifts, regardless of size or intention, they proactively shut down that gateway to institutional corruption.
The message was uncompromising.
It was. Public officials were salaried servants of the state and the people, and they could not be financially indebted to any private entity.
But the real strength of any rule is in the enforcement. How was compliance ensured? What happened if someone was accused of breaking this code?
This is where the structural genius comes in. A system for immediate review. The sources mandated that any financial complaint against an official, whether from a citizen, a subordinate, anything, had to be reviewed immediately. No bureaucratic delay.
Immediate review is a powerful deterrent. It shows that financial integrity is the state's highest priority. If an official knows a complaint will just sit in a pile for months, they're more tempted to risk it.
Absolutely. The speed of justice maintains the system's integrity. Inertia is the friend of corruption. And in the historical accounts, we see instances where officials who misappropriated funds or took illicit gifts were stripped of their office and their ill-gotten gains were returned to the Treasury.
So the lesson here is simple but critical. Power without swift, verifiable oversight inevitably becomes exploitation.
It perfectly connects the ethical foundation of Case 81 to the systemic reality of Case 85. If the Treasury is a sacred trust, then those who manage it remotely must be under constant verifiable scrutiny.
We've spent this time establishing the character and the systems designed to protect the money. Now we have to address the purpose of it all. This wasn't just about saving money, it was about achieving economic justice.
Right. What's the goal?
Case 86 addresses the primary mechanism for this, Zakat.
This is a pivotal point. We often think of Zakat, the mandatory poor due, as a simple religious obligation. But in Case 86, the sources elevate it beyond just an act of worship, an ibadah,
So what did they institutionalize it
as a constitutional economic right, a haq of the poor.
That distinction is profound. If it's just worship, it's optional. But if it's a constitutional right, then the state is legally and morally compelled to collect and distribute it. It becomes a guaranteed economic safety net.
Exactly. This mandated collection transforms Zakat into the central mechanism of the state's financial policy. It codified the belief that the wealthy held a constitutional obligation to the poor, and the state was the instrument for fulfilling that obligation.
And we see just how non-negotiable this was when we look at the historical context. The sources detail the conflicts that arose when certain tribes refused to pay zakat after the Prophet's passing.
Yes, and Abu Bakr took serious, decisive action. He didn't see it as a mere tax revolt, he saw it as a constitutional crisis, an attack on the fundamental structure of economic justice.
So refusing to pay zakat wasn't just withholding funds, it was striking at the very core of the social contract.
That's the powerful connection he drew. He recognized that when the mechanism designed to protect the vulnerable is dismantled, the entire structure of justice collapses. By enforcing it with the full weight of the state, he institutionalized economic stability.
This draws powerful parallels to our modern discussions around social welfare taxation, unemployment benefits, social security.
All mandatory contributions designed to maintain a stable social floor. Case 86 is an early systemic precedent for that kind of institutionalized economic security. It's proactive, not just reactive charity.
Okay, so the money was successfully collected. Now, Case 83 addresses the critical question of how it was distributed. What was the fairness principle that guided allocation?
The principle was clear and, for its time, radical. Allocation was based strictly on need. It overrode traditional criteria like nobility, tribal status, or even past service to the state. All public wealth was to flow to those who required it most.
That is radical. In many societies back then, status dictated privilege. Those from high-ranking clans would naturally expect priority access to resources. How was that expectation managed?
Through constitutional clarity, the policy made a strong statement. Meritocracy and status are secondary when it comes to economic assistance. The only relevant metric was current economic vulnerability.
So the system explicitly prioritized the weakest members of society.
The weakest and the most marginalized, yes.
What were the administrative challenges of assessing need across different regions? That must have been a huge task, and one very prone to bias.
A massive challenge. The state relied on local officials to conduct assessments of local needs, verifying the number of poor, the size of newly converted tribes needing support, and so on.
And the risk of bias.
It was there, of course, a challenge modern states still face. But the central mandate to prioritize need over status acted as a counterweight. Local officials knew the Caliph's focus was uncompromisingly on the marginalized.
The specific groups prioritized newly converted tribes, poor regions. It shows the funds were being channeled exactly where they could have the greatest impact on stability and equity.
And this is the critical takeaway. Economic justice must actively support legal justice. It's not enough to have a fair court system if a huge part of your population can't meet their basic needs. Case 83 mandated an equity-based fiscal policy.
That sets the foundation for who gets the money. But the final piece of the economic puzzle, Case 87, addresses the macroeconomic goal, the prevention of wealth concentration. This is about the dynamic circulation of capital.
And this is the highest objective of the entire financial system. The whole structure, from strict accountability to need-based allocation, was fundamentally geared toward ensuring public wealth was not allowed to accumulate among a small elite class.
They had to keep moving.
It had to be kept circulating broadly among all communities.
Capital has a natural tendency to pool together. How did this system actively fight that beyond just Zakat?
Through practical logistical measures designed for broad reach. The sources highlight an active mandate to ensure wealth reached remote regions and marginalized tribes, the places that often get ignored when resources are scarce.
So it wasn't just local charity.
No, it was a conscious fiscal policy designed to inject liquidity and resources into the economic margins, the places where money naturally resists flowing.
Why is this circulation goal so vital from a governance standpoint? Why can't the wealth just sit in a central treasury?
Because the profound lesson, which history repeats endlessly, is that concentrated wealth fundamentally weakens social cohesion. When resources and opportunities are hoarded by a tiny segment of the population, resentment hardens into conflict.
The social contract phrase.
It becomes severely strained because the majority feel the system is rigged against them. So when the economic gap gets too wide, it stops being just a justice issue and quickly becomes a stability issue for the state itself.
So the goal was socioeconomic balance.
Precisely. By ensuring wealth circulated widely, the state actively mitigated the risk of collapse rooted in inequality. We see parallels in modern anti-monopoly rules or investments in regional development, all fiscal systems designed to maintain social equilibrium.
Taken together, these 8 cases form an incredibly coherent, highly disciplined, and ethically grounded financial doctrine.
If we synthesize these 8 constitutional decisions, these 8 pillars governing the public purse, we can see how comprehensive Abu Bakr's economic constitutionalism really was. It establishes a doctrine where ethics and economics are, well, they're inextricably linked.
Let's systematically review those 8 core pillars for you, the listener, just to reinforce how they move from philosophy to practical implementation.
So the structure begins with the philosophical and the personal commitment. First, 1. Public wealth is a sacred trust, case 81. It's owned by the people, and the ruler is just its guardian, its wali. 2. The Caliph is personally accountable to the law, case 88. This is leadership by example, down to tracking the use of a thread or a needle.
Right. Then it moves to the enforcement of integrity and self-restraint. 3. An absolute ban on corruption, case 82. The refusal of comfortable stipends and the return of every single state asset upon leaving office. 4. Transparent financial records, case 84. Written ledgers tracking all income and expenditures, which establishes the very foundation of auditability.
And finally, you have the structural and judicial mechanisms for justice. 5. Oversight over all officials, case 85. Strict rules against accepting gifts and that system of immediate review for any financial complaint. 6. Zakat as institutional economic justice, case 86. A mandated contribution that's recognized as the constitutional right of the poor, enforced by the state.
And the last 2.
7. Need-based distribution of wealth, case 83. Prioritizing the vulnerable over status when distributing funds. And finally, 8. Preventing wealth concentration, case 87. A structural objective to ensure wealth circulates to maintain social cohesion.
This is where the aha moment really crystallizes. This model isn't just a list of moral rules, it's an interconnected system. The ruler's character acts as the ultimate external audit, supporting a whole system of checks and balances.
They didn't just target the symptoms of corruption, they tried to eradicate the source of the temptation itself.
And what we're left with is one of the world's earliest fully structured systems of ethical public finance. It merged the highest possible personal ethical standard with uncompromising institutional checks and judicial oversight.
All of it built on a foundation of humility and vigilance.
It proved that even a rapidly expanding state, managing immense resources, could operate its finances with purity, viewing every single expenditure through the demanding, unwavering lens of public service. We started today by contrasting the test of courage with the test of character. The sources offer a final, profound summation that really draws a line under everything we've discussed across these 8 cases.
The closing thought for this section is this. A ruler's greatness is not measured by his wealth, but by how he protects the wealth of the people. And Abu Bakr As-Siddiq protected it with a purity unmatched in history.
That shifts the entire metric of leadership, doesn't it? From personal glory and accumulated wealth to the diligence of constitutional duty. And it challenges you, the listener, to consider, in our modern systems, where financial scandal seems almost inevitable, how much stronger would our governance be if our leaders voluntarily held themselves to that thread or needle standard?
If personal accountability truly superseded legal requirement.
That's the lasting, powerful legacy of these constitutional decisions.
It's the ultimate fusion of absolute ethics and sound economic statecraft.
We have laid the detailed groundwork for the economic backbone of this constitutional state. Next time, we are moving outside the borders entirely.
In our next deep dive, we'll examine cases 89 through 96, exploring foreign policy, international justice, and diplomatic principles. We'll analyze how Abu Bakr built a constitutional model for engaging with the outside world, setting precedents for just war and treaty obligations.
Join us next time for that fascinating look into statecraft and international law. Thank you for diving deep with us.